I love you people. Every time I come here, y'all are so nice to our family. They're not nice to me like that in Columbia. I think it's because of the shirts my sons wear with are orange, tiger paws, and it's so good to be back here with you. I'm so excited about your pastor, Bart. Huh? Yeah. I talked to him on Friday, and I said, man, I am so glad you got there when you did, because Ron Barker ran out of sermons. Because he only does interims for a short period of time. He was coming to try to get material from me, and I said, listen, I can't help you in this, man. You're on your own. So I talked to Bart. I told him, I said, I'm excited about going down, and he told me not to mess you guys up. And then he said, what you preaching about? So I told him. He said, you can't say all that in 30 minutes. I said, is that all you're going to give me? He said, oh, yeah, you got to get them out by 8:30. I said, all right, I'm 9:30. I said, all right, I got you. But God is on the move here, and I'm really excited about your student pastor that's coming. Man, Leslie Creech is going to do an amazing job here. And man, you get Jeremy with her, and that's just icing on the cake. You know, Jeremy served with me for like 10 years, and when he tells you lies about us on Friday mornings at 5:30 a.m., sitting at Hardee's and praying through life like 10, 15 years ago, not really knowing where God would lead him, he always would pick at me because he would be bright-eyed. He's one of those guys at 5:30, he's just excited about the day being here. And I'm like, it don't even get started for another couple of hours. And so I would roll in and have those times together, and they would pick at me unmercifully. And so I'm really excited about him being here. I'll just give you a real quick update on my family. Lisa celebrated her 30th birthday again this weekend. And she's doing amazing, keeping our house in order. And she's the assistant principal at Lake Murray Elementary School. Caden's a 10th grader at River Bluff High School, making straight A's. And except for his driver's permit test, but for some reason you can miss 5 and still make it to the road. And so it's helped me in my prayer life. And I'm like, which one did you miss, right? I mean, because if you miss the stop sign question, that's a big deal, right? But anyway, we're real proud of him. And he's a high schooler. Connor's an 8th grader at Meta Glen, and he plays football, and he practices all week his celebration that he's going to do when he gets a sack. And then in the heat of the game, whenever he gets a sack, it's something totally different. And so he's just a lot of fun to be around. Middle schooler, high school, middle schooler. And then we've got a 1st grader, right? Quarters in the 1st grade now, and he's the same age as Caden was when we left here. So it's going to be kind of fun in the 11 o'clock service when he comes. I'm just going to walk him around to the people that are in that service and introduce him as Caden. Like, here's Caden. Oh, you look just the same as when you left. But anyway, Caden now, I look up to him depending on which pair of shoes he's wearing. And so that's my family. Now, Rokeem, you remember Rokeem in our family? We met him here by being a missionary. You guys sent me out as a youth pastor to be a football coach. And when you sent me out as a football coach, I met Rokeem my first year, 8th grader. And so he graduated from college about a year and a half ago. And he's worked a year now at Lexington High. And he got married this past weekend. And got married on the beach. And just a great experience to be able to see him move into another realm of his life along the way. There's a lot of things about Barnwell that I miss, specifically you guys. There's one thing I don't miss, and that was going to the grocery store in Barnwell. Because when I go to the grocery store where I'm at now, and Lisa says, I want you to go run and get something, I just run there, I get it, nobody knows me, I don't see anybody, I keep my head down, I get back out. And I remember, like, every time Lisa would send me to the grocery store here, she would say, go and get these things, and then I would go, and then everybody in the store I had to have a conversation with about what was going on in life. And it's funny because you guys lie to everybody here at the church every Sunday, right? In your Sunday school classes, it's how you doing? Fine, good, everything's great, man, fine, everything's good. And you do that all day long on Sunday, and the only person, and you see them in Walmart, hey, how you doing? Good to see you. All right, fine, everything's going fine, until you see the pastor, and it's like, how you doing? Well, you got a minute? And no, actually, I don't. I'm just here to pick up a few things. And I just need to. Can I just talk to you about something's going on in my life? And Lisa would always give me a list of things to do, and if she verbally told me there's a rule, she can only give me 2 things. If she starts into the third, which is always, there's 2 things to go to the grocery store to get. If she starts into the third, I cut her off and say, send me a text. I'm not even going to listen because I always forget. And what would happen here, I didn't realize that here, what would happen here is she'd give me 3 things, and I would get to the store, I'd run into a few of you, I'd get distracted, and I wanted to have conversation with you, talk to you, so I'm hanging out in Walmart, I become the greeter and just not getting paid, and then as I'm in there, though, I totally forget what she sent me in there to do, and so I just start buying stuff. Guys can relate, right? I mean, you just start buying stuff. You first go to the meat counter, and you stock up on steaks for the rest of the month. And then anything on sale you're buying. Oh my goodness, it's buy one, get one free. Might as well get 4 of these in. And you pick up all these things along the way. And then I would come home literally with like 5 bags of stuff. And Lisa would go, what are you doing? Like, I went to the grocery store for you. Well, why'd you buy all that? I just sent you there to get 3 things. Oh, well, there was a sale going on. Just got some stuff, helping out the fam here. Well, did you get the flour? What? Why would you buy flour? Why do you eat flour? It's like what do you do with flour? It doesn't even taste good. I mean, and what's funny is you can get so consumed and distracted that you do a lot of things except for the one thing that your wife tells you to go and do. It sounds very similar to how Jesus kind of talked with us. He gave us one thing to do, and then we get involved with people, we get involved with church and programs, and we get so distracted by good things. Even produce some things that are really good. Even see some things that are really neat to see. But we lose sight of the one thing that Jesus wanted us to do. And so that's why we can go an entire year in our life and not think of one person far from God that we personally engaged to help them become a disciple. You see, when Jesus gave the one thing, he said, I want you to go and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And when he says this to the disciples, everybody else is lost. So if everybody else is lost when he says this, what he was saying is, I want you to go and make disciples of lost people. Now, how can he say that to us? And that's the one thing that we were told to do, and then we start to either get distracted or either we get a little fearful to do that. And so we start doing a bunch of other things and try to look at God and say, look at what all we've done. And then I just wonder if Jesus would just say, you know what, you wasted a lot of time doing a lot of things that were pretty decent, but you didn't do the one thing I asked you to do. And that is to make disciples of lost people. And so, today as we look at a story in John chapter 4, I want us to see how Jesus modeled for us how to get started in making disciples of people far from God. Now, the market's pretty huge on this, right? There's 3 out of every 4 people in Barnwell right now that are not engaged in any Christian church in this town. 3 out of every 4. Now, if you talk to them, don't ask them where they go to church, because they will tell you a church. 90% of them will tell you a church. But they don't go to church. Just ask their kids. The kids won't lie. Because when you ask the kid, where do you go to church? We ain't nowhere. We don't go to church anywhere. You ask the dad, oh yeah, we go to the Methodist church right down the road here. Been going there all my life. Just hadn't been in 3 years. So 3 out of every 4 people are not engaged in any Christian church this morning. So how do you get started with them? Well, in John chapter 4, we see Jesus with his disciples, and it says in verse 3, he leaves Judea and went back once more to Galilee, and it says he had to go through Samaria. So he comes to this town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well, and it was about the 6th hour. And when a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, will you give me a drink? his disciples had gone into the town to buy food. Jesus didn't really have to go through Samaria logistically. You know this, right? I mean, he could have gone the route that most Jews took because they went around the bad area of the countryside. You see, Jesus was intentional about placing himself in proximity to others who were different than him in order to have a conversation with them. Now, this Samaria was a different place. This Samaria was filled with what they would call half-breeds, half-Jews that had mingled with pagan people during the exile. And when they came together, they started taking on the practices of some of the pagan people. And so the Jews would actually look down upon this other race of people. And as they looked down on them, they avoided them. They didn't want to be unclean. They didn't want to be caught with them. They didn't want to be caught on that side of town. So a great question for us to ask ourselves is, where would you not be caught dead going in this county? Like, let's say, like between 8 and 11 o'clock at night. Where would you not be caught dead going at your school? In other words, you've got cool points kids in your school, and because of those cool points, you don't want to mess things up by going and sitting at another table. You might get some type of reputation. You see, Jesus was always going to where other people would not go, and he would press into those areas. And many times it was because he was getting himself in proximity to people that were different than him. The first thing that he does is have relational conversation. If you're taking notes in your head or writing them down, relational conversation is the first building block of having a gospel conversation with someone who's far from God. I don't really have to tell you how to build relationships with people, but I probably do need to challenge you to notice people. Because some of you notice really well, and then some of you don't. So we'll just figure out who notices really well. Everybody close your eyes and don't cheat. It'll only take 7 seconds. Close your eyes right now where you are. Don't cheat. Don't cheat. Now, some of the men are going to try to cheat. Don't cheat. What color shirt is the person to your right and your left wearing? Just think about it. What color shirt? Now, what brand shirt is the person on your right or your left wearing? If you don't know because it doesn't have an emblem or anything on it, you're not going to get held responsible. All right, lift up your eyes. Look to your right and left. See how well you did. See how well you did. All right? We're not going to ask if you did well. Okay, because some of you guys said your wife had on a red shirt and she has on a dress today. You see, a lot of times we don't notice people. Well, it's one thing when you're talking about somebody's shirt, but I mean, what about the grocery store that you guys go to all the time, Walmart here that you go to all the time? Visualize who you see all the time there. Some of you can't even visualize the people that you see there all the time. But what if you can visualize, what's their name? What's their kid's name? What about the gas station you always go to? You know, the clerk that comes and checks you out? Well, what's their name? Where are they from? What about Mi Rancho or China Express or China City? What's the owner's name? You see, a lot of times we can go through our life in close proximity to people and never notice them. Almost act like they're never even there. Well, Jesus notices this woman, and then he asks her a question. He says, "Will you give me a drink?" Now, this may not be a big deal to you, but for him to speak to her was an amazing deal. You see, she had 3 things working against her for him to even speak to her. First of all, she was a woman during this time when God-fearing Jews did not even speak to their wives in public. They were considered second-class citizens. All throughout Scripture, Jesus crashes this taboo by treating women with dignity and respect in public constantly. Hey, it'd be great to have some men in our country that would start doing that. They would start raising that banner. Hey, teenage boys, it'd be great to see you start treating women with respect in your school. You'll be looked at differently because all the other guys aren't doing it. What would it look like for you to start treating women with respect and dignity. Also, she was a Samaritan. Because she was a Samaritan, she was the offspring of these Jews who had intermixed. So, in other words, she was interracially connected, religious-wise and people-wise. And the third is she had a bad reputation, which you'll find out later on, because he comes to her in a time of day when the women didn't go to the well at that time because it was hot. They would have all gone in the beginning of the day. So that means that the women wouldn't even speak to her. She was by herself when she was at the well. But there's this other thing that's brewing here in verse 9 that's pretty wild, because in verse 9 it says, "You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan. How can you ask me for a drink?" That's literally can be translated, "You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan. We don't even drink out of the same cup. We don't even use the same dishes." That's important because Jesus didn't bring his water bottle to the well. He asked for her cup. Now, there's one thing you don't do in my house when you're a boy, elementary school. They have just decided that there's this one thing that you don't do. Now, when they come to the dinner table, they'll come to the dinner table. Their hands will be all messy, just nasty. They'll come. They won't wash their hands. We have to remind them to wash their hands. They're looking to see if they're dirty. No. Trust me, they're dirty. Go wash your hands. And they'll do all kind of unsanitary things like that. One of my boys yesterday dropped a squash on the floor and picked it up and ate it. I mean, that's just the way, that's guys, right? That's boys. But there was one thing, sanitary-wise, that they would not do when they were in elementary school. And that is drink after a girl. Because that's like kissing one. And as an elementary school guy, that's like, no, that's off limits. There's no way I'm drinking after a girl. Now, we laugh about that and we think about, there's no way you can get a disease or a sickness from a girl. Maybe she was sick, but not just because she's a girl, right? I mean, how could, when you grow up, you grow out of that kind of stuff, right? I mean, when you get older, you don't even think that way. However, your grandparents, it was not uncommon to see this. You see, my question is, how could the church at large come to church on Sunday mornings every single Sunday, then leave and go to the restaurant and walk by that and think that it was normal? Not just normal, but that's the way it ought to be. You see, we've come a long way in racial reconciliation in this country. We really have. But we've got a long way to go. And for us to act like there's no problem, I think puts our heads in the sand. In fact, for the church to act like we've arrived, I think for the church to act like we've arrived and not put intentional effort into racial reconciliation gives a bad name to Jesus. We got to speak up. 1960s, half of the church spoke up and led a revolution called the Civil Rights Movement. It was just half the church, though. What would it look like for the rest of the church to rise up and be the first and say, you know what? We're going to be intentional about being in proximity with people who are different than us. It's not enough just to open the doors of your church. This church has taken great strides. You guys love people in this community. It's not enough, though, just to open up the doors of your church and say, hey, you're welcome here. You've got to open up your dinner table. You got to open up your hobbies. You got to open up the people that you sit next to at the ball games. You got to open up the white space in your life, the free time in your life, to begin to include people that are different than you. And then be intentional about doing that. In Acts, Peter begins to speak. He says, I now realize how true it is that God does not show favoritism, but accepts from every nation the one who fears him and does what is right. Relational conversation first starts with asking for a drink. It first starts with talking to someone, with meeting someone in some kind of realm that's just normal life. And then he shifts to spiritual conversation. You see, as you have relational conversation and you start to actually care enough about somebody that you would have a dialogue with them, you have to move into a realm where you actually start caring about people. You know, one of the reasons that people don't share their faith with people that are far from God is because they really don't care. They're apathetic. It's not even a person to them because they haven't even noticed them yet. But when someone begins to become a person to you and not a project to you, all of a sudden you start to care about the person. And if you really care about the person, it causes you to have spiritual conversations with that person. So Jesus begins to get into this dialogue, which is actually pretty interesting. He shifts the conversation to move from physical water to living water that will satisfy the soul. And she's intrigued. She asks for this water. And then Jesus exposes her idol. All this is found in those next following passages. And he tells her to go and get her husband. And she says this in verse 17, "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is that you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What have you said? What you have said is quite true." I'm like, Jesus, calm down. You just met this person. You're getting up in their business. Why are you getting up in their business? Why are you calling out some truth that's in their life? How long does it take, by the way, to be in a relationship with people and put down the wall that says, I ain't got my act all together? Because people in the South, especially in Barnwell County, they try to act like they got their act together all the time. And it's not until they're on their way to the courthouse and people realize that they're getting divorced that they even talk to anybody about what's going on in their marriage life. Or it's not until they're totally upside down, they have to go bankrupt on their business, or they have to lose their home in foreclosure, that they finally have a conversation. We've been struggling with our finances for the last 5 years. You see, Jesus was willing to call out something that he noticed and knew. And you know things about people and you're in your relationship with people, but it causes you to have to ask questions, begin to probe, and a lot of times we say, we're not going to get up in other people's business. Listen, this is eternal business we're talking about. Get up in their business, man. I mean, my son Corder, I was talking to him, he's first grader. I said, who have you talked to about Jesus this past week at your school, in your class? He said, nobody, Dad. I said, well, listen, you need to go talk to somebody, man. There's plenty of kids at your school. Go just ask them about church and ask them about Jesus. He said, they'll laugh at me. He's in first grade. I said, laugh at you? I said, what if there's a big tractor trailer full of cotton candy in the parking lot? And you go to your class and you say, hey, guys, I got something to tell you. There's a tractor trailer full of cotton candy out there. What do you think they're going to do? You think they're going to get mad at you? You think they're going to say, hey, you're stupid? Do you think they're going to start making fun of you? He's like, no, Daddy, I'm going to be the hero. That's right, you're going to be the hero because they're going to all get free cotton candy. I said, man, heaven's a whole lot better than that. Hey, man, if you really care about somebody and love somebody, in spiritual conversation, you begin to talk about what's happening in their life. But it causes you to have to start asking questions and being curious about people. In fact, that word curious is kind of fun. The first part of that word's cura from the Latin language. And cura means to cure, to heal, to add value to. When you're curious to somebody, you're actually adding value to them. And you know this because when you talk, you know people that you've talked to before, and all they want to do is tell you about themselves, and they never ask you about your kids, right? They never want to know anything about you. And so you're like, well, here it goes again. Go ahead, tell me everything you got. Tell me about all the awards all your kids got and everything else. And they never ask you about anything that's going on in your life. But when someone's curious about you, it shows you that they have value for you. And so in asking questions, you can find out a lot about somebody. I was meeting with the guy sitting next to at the ball game all the time at one of my boys' ball games, and we've gotten to know one another the last couple of months of the games and stuff. And so I finally asked him a question. I said, hey, tell me where you're from. And he said, I'm from a small town that had, kind of town that has 5 bars and 3 churches. And I said, well, which one of those did you go to? And he kind of looked at me and laughed, and he said, such and such church. And I said, I was talking about the bar. And he started laughing again. I said, no, I'm kidding. I was just curious. Which church did you go to? He told me. He said, but you know what? I got baptized when I was 17 years old. I had a bad experience there. I haven't been back in 25 years. And for the next 20 minutes, it was easy. We just moved right into a spiritual conversation and ended up talking about the gospel, talked about other faiths, what they believed. But it was because those questions that were placed on the table of curiosity led to some spiritual conversation. And if you listen closely enough, people will tell you what their idols are. When Jesus begins to listen and talk to this lady, and he tells her, go get your husband. And she says, I have no husband. And he kind of reveals to her what he already knows about her. He sees that her idol is relationships. Now, when he talks to Nicodemus, he realizes his idol is knowledge about God, that it wasn't enough. When he talks to the rich young ruler, his idol is money. When he talks to Peter, his idol is the family business. And so in all those areas and arenas, when he's talking to them, he actually goes straight to the idol and then tells them to lay it down. He tells the rich young ruler, go sell everything, give it to the poor and follow me. He tells Peter, leave the family business, drop your nets. That's important because when you begin to have spiritual conversations with people, it should shift into gospel conversations with people, but this spiritual conversation with the person needs to begin to talk about some of those spiritual beliefs. So here's one powerful question you can begin to ask people. Hey, tell me about what your spiritual beliefs are. Don't ask about church. Don't ask about God, Jesus. Just say, hey, tell me what your spiritual beliefs are. Now, if you had more time, you might ask a question like, hey, what's one of the biggest questions you would ask God if you got a chance to? Or, hey, not what do you do for a living, but what are you living for? Hey, what are you living for? And begin to ask those questions that would probe. Now, Jesus, when he has spiritual conversations, you need to understand this. A spiritual conversation, he talked about worship in this passage. He talked about living water in this passage. And sometimes you guys will talk about church. Hey, will you come to church with me? Hey, will you come to small group with me? You'll talk about prayer. Hey, how can I pray for you? You can do all of those things, and it's a spiritual conversation, and it's great. But it's not the gospel. In fact, you could tell somebody, hey, what's going on in your life? How can I pray for you? They could tell you, you could pray for them, and then you can move on about your business, and they never would know what it means to follow Jesus. They wouldn't have a clue. You've got to shift from a spiritual conversation to a gospel conversation. Now, this shift is the one thing that the church does not do, okay? So if you do this, you will be in the top 10% of the whole church. Congratulations. In fact, that line that's there, pushing through that line takes some effort and energy. And in verse 25, the woman says this, I know that the Messiah called the Christ is coming, and when he comes, he will explain everything to us. And Jesus declares, I, the one speaking to you, am he. He gives the gospel. It's me you're looking for. Jesus is the one you're looking for. A gospel conversation, then, is a dialogue where the gospel is shared and a response is invited. Let me say that again. You might want to write it down. A gospel conversation is a conversation where the gospel is shared and a response is invited. That's what makes it a conversation. In fact, the only requirement of a gospel conversation is that it includes the gospel. Well, then you need to know what the gospel is, okay? Now, this is important. It's one sentence. You ready? The gospel is the good news of the saving death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Straight out of 1 Corinthians 15. Here it is again. You ready? The gospel is the good news of the saving death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. You see, the gospel, when you're sharing that, in just one sentence, hey, has anybody ever shared the gospel with you? I think so. Yeah, I went to church and stuff. Or, yeah, believe in God and all that. I mean, they might, no, not really. I don't know what the gospel. The gospel is the good news of the saving death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Why is it good news? Because you're dead in your sin. Why is it saving? Because you're on the way to death. It's saving you through what? The death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Christ is his last name? No, Christ isn't his last name. Jesus of Nazareth. But the reason we call him Christ is because he's the king, the one in control. He's the king of a kingdom. And when you become a Jesus follower, you're a part of that kingdom, and he's in control of your life. One sentence. The gospel is the good news of the saving death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And there's an imaginary line between a spiritual conversation and a gospel conversation that Rico Tice calls the pain line. You know it because you've gotten to that line before and there was too much pain and you couldn't push through. Like, who am I to judge? What if I say something wrong? But I got to get the preacher on the phone. Preacher, can you come talk to my friend? I've tried to get him to come to church. I've had a relational conversation with him. I think he's ready. Hey, my kid, I can't tell you the number of kids I went into in Barnwell and sat down with their kid and their family and shared the gospel with them because a parent called me up and said, hey, can you come to my house and share the gospel? Hey, I was excited to do it. Did it every time. When I went into the room, a lot of times, though, it was like this. Hey, Pastor, we'll be in the other room when you get done, okay? Just let us know how it went, all right? But no, don't leave. Where are you going? Where are you going? Come back in here. I want you to experience this, man. This is awesome. You don't have to go hide. In fact, you lead them to Jesus. You prayed with them. Because there's great joy in that. But there's a pain line that crosses because you don't think you're adequate, whatever. There's a whole list of things of why we don't cross that pain line. And I want to show you one of the main reasons that we don't cross the pain line is because the enemy lies to us. So I need one brave boy. One brave boy to come help me out. Are you brave? No, so I am not the guy. Who is it? Raise your hand. It could be a girl then. A girl. Brave girl. They got to be in elementary school, though. You got to be quick. Come on. Come on. Yeah, there you go. Say, these little boys around here ain't got nothing on me. Come on up here. Come on up here. All right. Now, what's your name? What? Hey, Audrey. Wave at everybody and tell them, hey. Say, I'm fixing to show y'all something. Go ahead and tell them that.
I'm fixing to show you something.
Boom. You see that? Hey, that was better than my son's sack celebration. That's pretty good. Talking junk already. All right. So I got the budget here, all right? But it's not the budget we're going to bust through, which you are, by the way. But it's a piece of paper you're going to get through, okay? So what I'm going to tell you to do is I'm going to tell you with all of your might, I want you to try to push through this piece of paper with a punch, okay? You think you can do it? All right, now I do need to tell you something, all right? You could potentially break your hand, okay? Now they're laughing. I am not laughing. In fact, I talked to Dr. Bart about this, Pastor Bart, and I told him, I said, I am not held responsible or liable if you break your hand. And he said, he perfectly understood that, and I could still do this, okay? All right? All right? So what I'm going to tell you is, they can see what's on the other side of this paper. You cannot. And what's on the other side of this paper will break your hand, okay? You cool with that? All right. So go ahead and bust through this paper. What? I just told you that what's on the other side of the paper will break your hand, okay? Feel these abs right here. Feel those abs right there. Okay. All right. You ready? It's not my stomach, though. I've got something behind the paper. Okay, but you can't see behind it, but they can see what's behind it. Okay? All right. If you're brave enough, push through. You're going to have to do harder than that. No, rear back. Rear back. There you go. And this time I want you to punch. Okay? You ready? Well, did you break your hand? Is it hurting? Let me see it. It's swollen up. Is it swelling? No. It didn't hurt at all? And you busted right through it? Well, I guess I was lying then. I'm sorry. Congratulations. Well done. You get to take the budget with you. Give her a big hand. Well done. All right. Here's the last statement I want to make to you. And I love getting a child to do it because the adults actually think about not doing it. I've actually had a guy look at me and try to look on the other side of the paper, and I wouldn't allow him to. Then he looked in the audience and tried to see if someone would let him say, hey, you got the thumbs up? No. I mean, he's contemplating this out, right? Because that's what Satan does to you, by the way. He lies to you constantly. He whispers in your ear and he tells you they're going to make fun of you. You're going to tell them something that's not right. You're going to mess this thing up. Hey, if you start this conversation with somebody, they're going to look at you differently. If you go down this road, you may lose a friend. You're going to be labeled as something at your workplace. And he whispers and lies to you constantly, and you don't push through. So in the invitation time tonight, this morning, here's what I want to challenge you to do. I want to challenge you to take some time to pray through who you did not notice this past week and who you need to be intentional with over the next 2 weeks to begin to build a relationship with, to have a spiritual conversation with, and ultimately to share the gospel with. The next 2 weeks. The next 2 weeks. But you want to know the main reason people don't share their faith? It's the same reason that people don't talk about their grandkids. You know why people don't talk about their grandkids? Because they don't have any. That's the only reason. Because I can't get you to shut up about your grandkids. I don't want to hear about your grandkids, but you want to tell me about them. And every conversation somehow comes back to your grandkids. But if you ain't got any, you don't talk about it. You know why you don't share your faith? Some of you? It's because you don't have any faith to share. Father, we come before you right now as we go into a time of worship to close out this time of, and